Hello and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and we're going to talk a little history today. There's history lessons in the making here. Erin Miranda, she is the Executive Director of the Waterfront Historic Area League, otherwise known as W.H.A.L.E. for many of us here. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. It's great to have you in here. Lots going on. And
yes.
You've been with the organization now a little over a year, and you've hit the ground running because there is just lots of stuff happening right now.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about right now, just over your first year. I mean, you've had some knowledge of W.H.A.L.E. in the past, as you were saying off camera, interning and what have you.
Yep.
So how's the first year going?
The first year has been, I think it's gone really great. It's been incredible. It was definitely a change for me. But as you said, I had some experience with W.H.A.L.E. I knew W.H.A.L.E. at my former position. I worked for a statewide organization, so I knew all the executive directors. I knew the projects that W.H.A.L.E. was doing. I knew the impact they were making in New Bedford. So to come in, it's been a lot to learn, but as you said, we really hit the ground running. I kind of feel like I'm getting my sea legs finally.
The projects don't stop, do they?
They don't. I literally came in my second day on the job. I was at a project meeting up at the former First Baptist, which is now Steeple Playhouse. And it was this torrential downpour, and everybody's looking to make sure that the new gutters were actually working and holding. And so this was day number 2 on the job, and it was a little bit overwhelming, but really exciting to just dive right in to wrapping up First Baptist Church, which took well over a decade, and I really was just pushing it over the finish line. A lot of work, obviously done by my predecessor at W.H.A.L.E. and all of our partners with your theater in the city. So that was really exciting, and it officially opened last November. So we had that. And then as soon as I accepted the job, my board chair said to me, okay, now we do strategic planning. So as soon as I joined, everybody's like, oh, what's W.H.A.L.E. going to do? What's next for W.H.A.L.E.? Because First Baptist had been so iconic for so long. And I said, we're going to figure out what's going to be coming next. Because W.H.A.L.E., as you know, has a history of over 6 decades in the city. They've we've had a hand or touched over 70 projects in 6 decades, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
So it was an opportunity which was really helpful for me, and strategic planning may sound really boring, but it involved a lot of talking with not just our board of directors, but also partners that we have across the city, city agencies, the planning department, talking with different partners, the national park. So it was really helpful to me as a new executive director, finding out how people viewed W.H.A.L.E., where they saw W.H.A.L.E. making an impact, where they saw we could be a little more impactful. So we really spent the better part of the first half of this year really digging into that. And I have a work plan for the next 5 years, which is really exciting. And the projects are still continuing even while we were doing that.
You have a preservation background.
I do.
And you're a history buff.
I am.
So what attracted you to this position? Because as you said, you were at the, for lack of a better phrase, the State Preservation Department.
Yep.
So what attracted you to come to W.H.A.L.E.?
I was really attracted to it because being a statewide was really incredible. I got to see and work with organizations all across the state, but sometimes it did feel like I was a bit, like mile wide and inch deep. And when W.H.A.L.E. would have successes, we would often be there, celebrating them. We had at one point listed First Baptist Church on our statewide most endangered list. So when that project was, going so successfully, we were there cheering W.H.A.L.E. on. And just the chance to get involved at a much deeper and more hands-on level, for lack of a better term. I knew W.H.A.L.E. really did a lot more with projects. I have a preservation background, but a lot of what I did with the statewide organization was a lot of advocacy, education, policy work. So like W.H.A.L.E. is here, I was a little bit here. So I was really attracted to really be focused on a geographic area.
Well, you're a local person.
Yeah,
I mean, you grew up in the area.
I did.
So these are familiar.
They are
buildings, for lack of a better, or just a familiar communities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the South Coast. My mother says, she really feels like it was my grandmother who kind of put everything together, and it's like, Erin's going to go work for W.H.A.L.E. I'm just from this area, so it really meant a lot to be able to come, to come home, for lack of a better term, and to really get involved with projects and really say, this is what we did. We made an impact here, and to interact with preservation in a different way. My career has been in preservation for 20 years, but I'm learning something new each and every day, which is really exciting. And our board of directors is incredible, and they're very involved. So I felt really comfortable taking the leap to say, yeah, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for W.H.A.L.E. And it's probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. So
the one thing I think with W.H.A.L.E., just in, knowing about it for 30 plus years myself, is that it's very personal. It's personal to W.H.A.L.E., and the projects are personal to the community. And I don't know if you can say that about other places.
You really hit on something there, saying it's personal. People in New Bedford, not just the Southwest, but people in this community really know what they have, they value what they have. They see their buildings, their neighborhoods, their community, and they know they're special, and they want to see them thrive. They don't want to see them lost to demolition, attrition, new construction. They know what they have, and they want to protect it, and they're very, very, very proud of it, fiercely protective of it.
The history is hugely important around here.
It really is, and I would oftentimes you show New Bedford as an amazing example of look what a community that embraces its history, its culture, and preservation, and they've used it successfully as a tool. I mean, look at the downtown core and everything, how it's changed over the past several decades. It really, really is personal. And when we get, when W.H.A.L.E. takes on projects, they are oftentimes very personal because you're putting in a lot of hours. You have this vision for what you want to see, and when it finally comes to fruition, it's really, really fulfilling. And I think preservation in and of itself is a very personal endeavor because, especially for W.H.A.L.E., some of the projects we take on are often very challenging. They come with a lot of issues, a lot of problems. So we put a lot of our organization into it. So
the one question that I knew I was going to ask you and that I told you too is that, really it stems from this. So how does W.H.A.L.E. pick a project? How do you, you always think as I guess developer, risk versus reward, but I don't think that that's your mantra because I look back and as you and I were talking about off camera, and I remember the Corson building distinctly, which seemed like an impossible task at the time when the fire happened, because I remember covering the fire. And you were talking about the Sundial building. These are projects that, well, the risk is huge. The reward will be great, but oh my gosh. So how do you go about looking at projects and saying, that's something we need to do?
I think there's how W.H.A.L.E. comes to be involved in projects has definitely evolved. In the early days, literally moving buildings out of the way of the bulldozer.
Yeah, in the 70s.
In the 70s, or the Sundial building, when that happened, this is I'm probably not saying anything new, but the day the gas explosion happened, there was a building that W.H.A.L.E. was just about to sell next door that got leveled in the explosion, so W.H.A.L.E. turned their attention to trying to save the Sundial building. So there are sometimes those instances where there is a building that is of such importance that it's the question is what's going to happen to this, and if it's historically significant to the neighborhood, to the community, to New Bedford, W.H.A.L.E. is oftentimes the one everyone will look to say, okay, what can we do with this, and then bringing our partnerships together. But as I was saying off camera, one of the pieces of our strategic plan is to really look at how does W.H.A.L.E. select a project. Over the past several years, we've come to do all sorts of projects, from creating, Steeple Playhouse to creating housing opportunities. So I think there's how we look at a project is it historically significant? Is it important to the neighborhood, to the community? Is there a story that's important and needs to be told? Is there an opportunity to help meet a current community need? Housing being a huge one, obviously, right now. Is there a way we can find the resources or their partners out there that would want to work with us on this? So there is, as we've been putting together, working with my board, trying to have, selection, criteria, okay, how we're going to look at this, and looking at the risk versus reward. Can we identify, whether it's through grants or funding programs, can we raise the money to actually restore this? But then it does come back to, W.H.A.L.E often takes on projects that no one else will because that risk versus reward sometimes doesn't pan out for a regular developer. But if they're important enough and significant enough, then that's something that W.H.A.L.E really takes into consideration, because our mission for 60 plus years has been enhancing, enhancing New Bedford through restoring and reusing its historic architecture for new uses, new and creative uses.
Is it harder to get funding now? Is it more challenging than ever before when you're looking at grants and what have you to revitalize these properties?
Funding is always the big issue, especially with preservation. If we had unlimited checkbook, it would be, we like to think everything would be easier. Grants do tend to be hard. Preservation, like direct preservation funding, is very limited, so sometimes we have to get very creative. Over the past decade, W.H.A.L.E has gotten very good at identifying different funding sources, working with state grant programs, larger programs, working with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, going after state funding, working with the city to get city funding to make these projects come to fruition. They're often not very simple funding sources. The financial structure can be really complicated. So it's a lot of piecing things together to actually make it work. So
and with your experience at the state level, you have a great background to know where where to go, what you're looking for, and where to find it. And I think that's probably a huge asset that you bring to the table. And I would assume federally the same thing. You're trying to find federal monies too, but again, with your position with the state, that probably gives you a leg up on other folks.
Yep, it was always one of the first question, where's the money? Where was the money? How can we find the money to do this preservation project? So coming at it knowing that it's going to be a complicated source of, tax credits, state funding, local fundraising. I can't say enough about, even Steeple Playhouse. There were a lot of just individual donations that people would send in to get that project over the finish line. So yeah, it's knowing where the different pots of resources are and having those relationships and connections to those agencies, those different grant organizations. I've worked with some of W.H.A.L.E's funders in my previous capacity. It's like, oh, nice to meet you. I'm now now I was a partner. There's this one, probably one of the best funders nationally for historic preservation is a group called the 1772 Foundation. And they, my former organization, we partnered with them to actually re-grant money to preservation projects in Massachusetts. We gave funding to W.H.A.L.E. So now I'm on the other side of that, applying for those grants, but also working with that foundation to directly fund some W.H.A.L.E. projects. So.
Erin Miranda is our guest. She's the executive director of the Waterfront Historic Area League. Talk about the relationship with the city, because I think obviously over 6+ decades, that's one thing that's been pretty strong is the relationship between W.H.A.L.E, the board and whatever, and the city, because it seems the mayors, including this one, value obviously the historic preservation of a lot of these buildings.
Definitely. If there's my biggest lesson and takeaway in my whole preservation career is partnerships and collaboration, and working with elected officials is key. So working with the city, when I took the job, I knew that W.H.A.L.E had always had a very strong relationship with the city administration, and
the council. The council approves it too. Yeah, the city council.
The city council, the different agencies. Planning, working with Ann Lauro, our preservation planner. All of and Jen Carloni, director of planning, working with Josh Amaral, Office of Housing and Community Development. Like all state agencies. I don't think preservation. Oftentimes we think of as just being this one little piece. Preservation's here, but it touches and has the potential to touch so many different constituencies and groups. So it really does cut across a lot of.
But it's helpful too when you go to, when you've got the city council that's valuing the preservation, and you've got the administration, which is a different form of government. They're backing it too. It just, I don't want to say it makes it easier, but it's nice to know that you've got their support, because they want to see you succeed as well, and not just you, but they want to see that project succeed, because they see the value of the value of it to the community.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't want to say always easier, but it's New Bedford is something special, and we know that. Mayor Mitchell is, he is so supportive of preservation and and just New Bedford, its historic landscape, its history, the stories it has to tell. So it's important that we keep working together, but also it's knowing that we have his support, he has our support. I would say in that, for any elected official, it's really important to have those relationships and cultivate them and show like the work that we do. And it's not just historic preservation. And one of the things that I've really tried to do over my career is, historic preservation is, yes, it's about a building. It's about restoring a building. It's restoring architectural details. But the end result is it's going to be used. It's going to be used to serve the community. People are going to use it. So how can we, so it's not just a building. It's whether it's housing, a community health center, a school. There's so many, it cuts across, like I said, so many different facets of life. And I think making that story and relaying that, you really do get a lot more, support from elected officials when you demonstrate the real impact that restoring and investing in our existing historic buildings.
And I think your success, W.H.A.L.E success over
Yes.
the decades, it has a proven track record of doing that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, obviously, the members of the state delegation and the federal delegation, because as you said earlier, you're looking for their federal and state monies too. So if you've got the delegation in your corner, it makes life a lot easier.
It really does. I spent a lot of time over the years lobbying down in Washington, D.C., and it was always fascinating. But the message that we would bring to our elected officials, it always made a lot of sense. They were always very supportive because we weren't just talking about historic architecture. We were talking about things that really mattered to their constituents. We're talking about jobs. We're talking about investing in communities. We're talking about increased revenues. We're talking about so many different things, and we're also investing in restoring and making our neighborhood stable. We're beautifying, for lack of a term, our downtowns. We're retaining stories that need to be told, that the future generations can relate to and connect with. So yeah, it was always very important to have that connection and make sure you make that case.
Talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the projects right now that you've got coming up. You and I were talking about that on the phone before. I mean, you've got a lot of things on the plate right now. You talk about the Steeple Playhouse, which is officially done.
It's officially done.
And they've already had performances there. Before I get to the projects, I think one thing, when you look at a project, and the Steeple Playhouse is one, you said it's not just the events, plays that are going on, but they're hosting other events too.
Yep.
For a venue or something that you're trying to refurbish, is it important for them to have multiple uses for it, so that you can get the biggest bang for your buck? And I'm generalizing it, but like you think Fenway Park, and how like all of a sudden they've turned it into, it hosts high school football games, it has hockey games and their concerts, and they've made it more of a year-round facility. Is that something, and again, that's one thing, but I mean, is that something that these projects have to do? They have to be able to do different things.
I think that's a really good way to think about it. And obviously, W.H.A.L.E helped, working with your theater over many, many years, coming up with, the business plan and the model for how is this, we're going to take this iconic historic church and we're going to turn it into a performing arts venue. What's that going to look like and what's it going to take? I do think that when we're looking at a historic project, if it's something that's not as perhaps straightforward as housing, if it's some other sort of use, the first question I would always ask when we need to save this building, it's like, well, what are we going to use it for? What's it going to be? How is it going to sustain itself going forward in the future? And that is important to W.H.A.L.E because we consider ourselves, we're only, so we have these, projects all across New Bedford. We were a part of their history. We were a chapter. And then we've turned them over to their new stewards, like your theater.
And that's, I think people need to know, you're not the owners of it. I mean, you refurbish them, and then basically you hand the keys to somebody else, and they're in charge of it.
They're now, they are the steward of these historic properties for its next chapter, and hopefully it keeps, continuing on down the line. So I think that's an important thing to, realize about W.H.A.L.E. We do own some properties on Union Street, but throughout our history, we have not really held on to property. We've done the restorations and then found another owner, user, so then we can pivot to tackling the next preservation project that we need to take. But looking at ways that you can have spaces, like Steeple's a really great example, that have different uses, can attract different revenue sources, but also allow the community to come in and experience this restoration that took a decade.
Right.
So they can get in there and see it and appreciate it.
So as we talk about the project, we talked about the Steeple Playhouse, the old First Baptist Church. What else are we looking at?
Well, the big project that we have out in front of us right now is the Hillman Street Firehouse, which is on the corner of Hillman and County.
Yeah, I mean, that's been there for so long. And
it has.
What is the hope with that?
The hope is that we will be under construction soon. W.H.A.L.E has been attached to this project for 5 years. We took it, we successfully responded to an RFP in April 2019 because it was going to be demolished by the city because it had been vacant for 30 years. So
what attracted you folks to that project in particular?
This was my predecessor, but because it was it's a very visible location, right on County Street,
right next to St. Lawrence Church.
I think a lot of people really had, I had been speaking with some people, several months ago, and someone asked me, "What are you doing with the Civil Defense Headquarters?" When I was a kid, I used to go in there, and it was like, so they have this connection to it, and they want to know what's going on with it. So it was an important New Bedford landmark. It was going to be demolished, and if not for W.H.A.L.E, it may very well would have been. So the size of it, W.H.A.L.E envisioned that it could be turned into housing. And then the pandemic hit. But it does take a long time, as we're talking about before, trying to bring together the complex financial structures. So applying for grants, applying for Community Preservation Act funds, getting state funding, historic tax credits, bringing all these pieces together. It's taken a long time to get to this point. And we've entered into, we're not doing this alone. We actually have a development partner that's going to work with us on this. So W.H.A.L.E bringing in our resources and our expertise and partnering up with CMK Development Partners, who just did Holy Family, which is right around the corner from Hillman Street Firehouse. So we can actually get this project off the ground. So we're hoping to be under construction soon.
Still housing?
It's still going to be housing. It's going to be 8 units of housing. We have a great design. We have support, locally. We're really excited to get this project off the ground finally. It's going to be 8 units of housing. So.
When you start a project, obviously there are things you can't control. But how long do you envision something like that taking if everything goes well?
If everything goes well, the actual construction, we're looking at a timeline of probably 18 months or so. Once the construction is finally underway. Yeah. It seems to, as with a lot of preservation projects, assembling the financing can take quite a while. But we're hopeful that the construction schedule will be about 18 months, and we can be. And then, it's always when you see, and I used to think about this too. When you see a historic building that's like the Hillman Street Firehouse, and it has been quite a long time. Sometimes, if people drive by and they don't know what's going on behind the scenes, they think nothing's happening. But so much of preservation work and projects takes place before any groundbreaking happens. So, and then when you get to the point you're actually in construction, you realize you are a lot farther down the project path than I think most people do, realize. But
this is one project that this thing's moving forward.
Yes, it's moving forward. We're really, really excited to finally get this underway, and then that's the and then part of my. Part of our plan and part of what our next step is to start working on W.H.A.L.E's future pipeline. How projects come to us can come from a variety of ways. Sometimes, people outright, approach us, "Hey, have you looked at this particular building? We're concerned about it," or just through word of mouth that things are coming online and it might be a good fit for W.H.A.L.E. So.
Do you go out of town?
No, our mission is contained. Our projects are just within the city limits of New Bedford.
Okay. No, I think people would want to know.
Yeah, previously, throughout W.H.A.L.E's history, they have done things outside of New Bedford. A good example of that is the Aiken House in Dartmouth.
On Dartmouth Street, yeah.
Yep, they worked in the early 2000s. They purchased the property, they helped to stabilize it, and then turned it over to the town of Dartmouth, and that's now managed by Dartmouth Heritage Preservation Trust. And we have done some things. There was some advocacy in Westport, I believe, and they've done some things in Fairhaven. But our actual project work is strictly confined to New Bedford.
Got about 3 minutes left here. So as you look at your future here down the road, You've got that Hillman Street, and obviously you're working with the Z as well in that regard.
Yep.
I mean, they're doing the project, but you've got your hand in there as well.
Yep. W.H.A.L.E is also, we're a historic consultant on a number of other projects in the city, the Z being one of them, which is a full circle moment because W.H.A.L.E did the first restoration of the Z in the early 80s. We're having a lot of these full circle moments lately. But yes, we're providing historic consulting services for that project, which is amazing to see. And I'm very excited to be, I know W.H.A.L.E is very excited to be a part of this new chapter for the Z. We're also working with the Cape Verdean Association on their rehabilitation of the Strand Theater up on Acushnet Avenue. We're, again, project management and some historic consulting services on that, and for the Strand Theater, and also for the creation of Island Park, which is right next door. So it's fantastic to be able to support our local nonprofit partners with their own historic rehabilitations and bringing our services and resources to help them with their own efforts.
So if people have questions or they want to get in touch with you folks, how can they do that?
They can go to they can give us a call. They can go to our website. Our contact information is right there. My proverbial door is always open. And if people have questions, I'm happy to answer questions. And I like to say, if I don't know the answer, I probably know someone who does. But sometimes just knowing that you can call somebody and you'll get a response, we'll do our best to help you as much as we can. And that even goes beyond, I'm very pro advocacy, and if I can help send you in the right direction, even if it's outside of New Bedford, I still have really great colleagues with Preservation Massachusetts, and there's a really great preservation network statewide. So I'm happy to answer questions. Our website is waterfrontleague.org.
It's a great website, though. There's a lot.
Thank you very much.
A lot of stuff on there.
Yes, and we have plans to put even more on there as well. More resources, just making it more user-friendly, and a lot more content that can be really useful for people if they have preservation questions.
I think the big thing, and you touched upon this earlier, I don't think transparency is, I guess, the word, but I think people really are curious about your projects.
Yeah.
And they just like to know where they
are, where they stand. Yeah. I would like to, and another thing coming out of our strategic plan, and this is an important part of preservation in general, is storytelling. We need to tell the stories of not just the importance of the buildings that we're working on, we're rehabilitating them, but also how this building relates to the neighborhood, how the work is going to impact the neighborhood, how it's, telling the story of how we got to this point, what we're doing. I would like to do a lot more in my free time with social media and giving more behind the scenes peeks, so people know okay, this is where Hillman Street Firehouse is. If W.H.A.L.E has another project, what's going on with this. People love behind the scenes and they want to know what's going on with these projects, and if we can help.
Because I think most people, and I'm generalizing, but I think most people do care about the projects and the things that you're saving, because they look at it as, that's, as you said, people talking about the Hillman Street house, or the fire station, I should say, going in there as kids. I think people care about those because it means something to them.
Yep, they have a personal connection to it. It's been a part of their, community for so many years, and they have their own memories associated with it. So if we can give these buildings, a new chapter, a chance for new stories and new experiences, that really speaks to the mission of W.H.A.L.E and really what we're all about.
That's going to do it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jim.
We'll have to have you back on again to give us updates.
I would love to come back and give you some updates.
That's great stuff.
Great.
Erin Miranda, our guest. She is the Executive Director of W.H.A.L.E. That's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.